So now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jerry Peterson, who is with the Contra Costa LGBT Youth Advocacy Collaborative, which is sponsored by the Rainbow Community Center. And Jerry is the collaboration facilitator, and we'll be telling you more about that. But I just want to say, when I heard of Jerry and I talked to him about possibly presenting, I was a little unsure because Contra Costa doesn't sound like a place that's really out in the lead on supporting LGBT students. Normally we think of San Francisco and LA. But when I began talking to Jerry, I realized Contra Costa is the perfect place to be sharing what they're doing with us because developmentally they're in a very similar place to where Sacramento is. The work in supporting LGBT students is emerging and the collaborations are developing just like they are here. When I came to Sacramento 7 or 8 years ago, there wasn't a single youth collaborative that I knew about, and now there are 4 or 5 focusing on LGBT students. So there's a lot we can learn from places like San Francisco and LA, but there's a whole lot we can learn from places like Contra Costa and from folks like Jerry. So I'd like to welcome you, Jerry, to come and share what you're doing.
I am incredibly excited and honored to be with you today. And I'm a person who's passionate about building systems of care, and that's really what I want to talk to you about today. I am passionate about being an advocate for LGBTQ youth and for their wholeness and for their positive vision. But what really, I think, gives me the credentials to be able to stand before you is that if we took this entire event and went backward in time about 40 years to 1972, I would have been the 10th grade student walking in on the first day of class in a small rural farming village in the Appalachian Mountains of Pennsylvania, proudly wearing a plum silk shirt and a perfectly matching plum herringbone tweed pair of pants, absolutely convinced that no one in the world would ever think I was gay. I managed somehow in that school environment to pass. I think we know what passing is, and passing takes an enormous amount of energy, psychological, emotional energy, just to pass. I passed while friends of mine were beat up. That was 1970s. And here we are today. What has changed? Is it getting better? What's happening? Well, the first thing that tells me that it's getting better is that I want, as that young guy, young student in that fabulous plum shirt, is standing here today with all of you in this place. How absolutely amazing. Give yourselves a hand for being here. And yet, one of the things that in my personal experience, in my professional experience, that tells me that the trouble that we have in schools and in communities around this issue is the very politics that you brought up and the religious issues that we bring into the room because of our various identities. And so even as I'm here to talk to you about building a system of care, what I want to say to you is that we cannot build a system of care. We cannot do very much positively to change the cultures and environments we are in for students until we learn to do something very fundamentally different with each other as the adults who are creating the environments in which our students must live. And if you don't remember any other slide or anything that I say to you today, I want you to remember this slide. There are vast differences of thought and belief and morality and political persuasion represented right here in this room, let alone the environments in which you are all working and teaching and living. And so it's critical that we find a way to be able to listen as adults across our differences and to listen carefully and to be able to find common ground. It's absolutely critical that you've got to listen from your heart, not just from your head. That you've got to listen first and foremost to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, youth, children and youth themselves. And I'm delighted by the voice that's present in this event from them, because thinking that we know or we understand, even if we had some personal experience with it, it's not the same as what's going on today and knowing for sure what they are experiencing. It's listening to family members of these children and youth and their struggles to accept, and being able to be with them and meet them where they are in their process of acceptance, whether or not you agree with their stance. It's about empathic listening, putting ourselves in their place, doing everything we can to filter out our own biases and simply try to listen and hear and understand. Listen to your peers. Listen to what research has to say. And Covey's 7 Habits, one of the most important things that I would commend to all of us in all of this work, always seek first to understand and then be understood. That is the critical starting place and in many ways ending place for building community partnerships, because if we can learn to do that work together as we learn to do that work, we can bring about transformation in some incredible ways. When you can gather this much wisdom, energy, experience, and power in one room, what in the world can be done in this community and in this county when we're able to do that? Before I go on, I want to take a moment, and I'm going to ask you to close your eyes if you're comfortable, or find a focal point at the front of the room and focus on that. And I invite you to allow the face of a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning youth that you either know or think might have one of those identities, and allow just the image of that person's face to come to your mind. And now, from your heart, I want you to allow to come forward for you a concern that you have for that person. And with that concern in mind, I invite you now to open your eyes, turn to a neighbor in 2 or 3, and just share very quickly what that concern may be. So I'll call your attention back. Call your attention back. Call your attention back. So I invited you to do that because it's important in our work together as communities and in building systems of care. It is critical that we carry within our hearts and our minds the awareness of the people for whom we want to help make life better. I also brought it up because that is a really good way for you to enter into conversation with one another, one-on-one or in small groups, when this difficult topic comes up. And it's hard to know where to go with it or what's going on, or if I feel really positive on the topic and really supportive and I don't know where someone else is coming from, what am I most likely to do? Say nothing. Or if I believe that this is really a moral issue that I really have a problem with, but I don't know where the person next to me is coming from, am I going to say anything? Probably not. And so we don't talk and we don't listen. And the truth is that this issue goes beyond morality, it goes beyond politics, and all of the work, and what I want to talk to you about today is that the place where I hope we can find agreement is on doing no harm. Doing no harm. It doesn't, you can hold your religious beliefs that are important to you. You can hold your political stances that are important to you. But these are young human beings. Do no harm. So, on to the meat of what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about the groundbreaking research that has formed the basis of our project in Contra Costa County. And is really transforming the conversations and dialogues that we are having with one another and giving us openings in settings where prior to that, when we were taking a more activist stance and really promoting full acceptance and moving beyond mere, and where our language is always about moving beyond mere tolerance to full acceptance and getting resistance. For all the reasons that have been so well mentioned already here today. So the research about family rejecting behaviors and one of the core and the simplest ways that we are finding to enter into these conversations differently. Then tell you a little bit about Contra Costa County's efforts to address the health disparities that research has demonstrated among LGBTQ youth. And that we are, as a county, looking at a school, community, and service provider system of care, a fully identified and clearly codified, basically integrated referral network is what we're working on in the county. Promising practices then in school and community collaborations, and what are we learning from that work? So that's what I'd like to cover with you today. So the groundbreaking research, I don't know how many of you may have heard of Dr. Caitlin Ryan and the Family Acceptance Project at San Francisco State University. There's very little research out there, but there is becoming more and more in recent years. And this research first really started becoming available just in 2009. And in there, the study was a study of LGBT young adults, and it was a retrospective study related to their experience as adolescents in their families. And one of the first things that they found is that on average, youth realized that they were gay around age 13, which flies in the face of a lot of the cultural beliefs around the development of our sexual identities. And many of them knew that they were gay even at younger ages, such as 7 or 9. And one of the most common things that I hear in relationship to this is, but how could they know? They're young, they're developing, how could they know? It's just fluid, it's just a fad, it's just they'll pass through it, how could they know? Well, let me ask you, for the heterosexual folks in the room, how did you know you were heterosexual without having sex? How did you know? Was it just an experimental thing? How did you know? How did you figure it out? Well, guess what? It's really not any different. It's really not any different. The age of pubescence and the growth of and awareness of ourselves as sexual beings carries with it the awareness of attraction. And this is before thought. This is not, no agenda could have made me gay. I didn't want to be. I fought it for years. I tried to come out when I was 21. I got scared. I got married. I didn't come out until I was 40. And divorced and had 3 children. Many of them didn't tell anyone. And why didn't they tell anyone? We know the answer. Because by that time, they had learned that their identity was shameful and wrong from family, from all kinds of messages, subtle and otherwise, from friends, from church, from religious gatherings, and from all kinds of other people in the community. And so the silence on this issue itself is harmful. Very harmful. So through this research, and I'm really summarizing this very, very briefly, but Dr. Ryan was able to identify over 100 behaviors, both accepting and rejecting behaviors, that families use and demonstrate in response to the news that they have a child who is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning. And the research, this research was able to demonstrate more clearly than any other research that I've read that family acceptance is one of the strongest protective factors for LGBTQ youth in existence. But family rejection also is one of the most serious factors in serious mental health issues and physical health issues. What the research revealed was that LGBT youth who experienced high rates of family rejection of their sexual orientation or gender identity are at 8.4 times higher risk of lifetime suicide attempts, at least once, 5.9 times higher risk of depression, 3.4 times higher risk of illicit drug use, and 3.4 times higher risk of unprotected sex. Now, I want to clarify that statement. This is LGBT youth who experience high rates of family rejection. What the research showed is that the LGBT folks that they talked to in young adulthood who had experienced either lower levels of rejection or greater levels of acceptance from their families, basically their mental health and physical health issues were undetectably, were not different detectably from the general population. So that it really underscores the fact that family rejection, what's going on in the home, is one of the most serious issues that we're facing. And as educators, we all know very well that you are working with the products of home environment. And so this is really critical information. So, and this, I think, is a much more graphic way to look at the same data. This is the first, lifetime suicide attempts, 1 or more times, in highly rejecting families, 8.4 times more likely to have at least one lifetime suicide attempt. But what's fascinating to me, and incredibly important, is look at the next category to the left, moderate rejection, meaning that there was still experienced rejecting behaviors at home, but there was less harm done, in fact, so much less harm done by simply reducing the level of rejection, not moving all the way to acceptance. There is so much less harm done that it cut the risk factors in many cases by 2/3 or more, simply by reducing the level of rejection at home. What that does is it begins to open the doorway for saying, hey folks, we know you love your child. You move beyond the behaviors that you may feel inclined to judge. And this is the philosophy that we've adopted in all of our work with families, and even with our work with religious folk and educators in the county, is to say, we know you love your children, and we know that you are concerned about their safety and their well-being and their futures as young adults. We know that you love them and care about them. And so that's the common ground. And so because you love them, we would like you to understand what we have learned about their experience and the harmful effect that some things that are happening at home may be having on them that you are not aware of and are not thinking about. The top rejecting behaviors that were identified in the Family Acceptance Project research, the primary rejecting behaviors that really increase the risk: hitting, slapping, or physical abuse, verbal harassment, name calling. Now those two are not surprising, I'm sure, to anyone here, because anyone who's experiencing that at home is, can become impaired in a variety of ways in their lives. But then you start moving down. So the third one is exclusion from family and family activities as a result of your LGBTQ identity. Your sexual orientation or your gender expression or your gender identity means that you are separated from your family. Blocking access to LGBT friends, events, and resources. Blaming the child if they are discriminated against at school or anywhere else. Pressure to be more masculine or feminine. Telling a child that God will punish them for their identity, or expressing shame and keeping their identity secret. There are lots of families who privately, within the confines of their home, will say, I love you and I accept you, but don't tell grandma. I mean, that's pretty... So even in moderately and accepting environments, there are still messages of secrecy, shame, and silence around these topics. And our insistence on not listening, not talking, on maintaining silence is one of the most critical aspects of the harm that's being done with LGBT youth. And so all of this this research creates this perspective, and I am finding that I can enter into conversation with folks in African American congregations, with Latina mothers, in all kinds of settings across our county, and we have a very diverse county, even in rural, more religious settings, where when the message is, we know you love your child, can I share some information with you? And they are shocked and dismayed. And then when the question is posed, can we talk about how to reduce harm, how to change or stop doing some of these behaviors so that it begins to relieve some pressure, and that you can begin to enter into a different kind of relationship with your child? Would you be willing to talk about that or to make that change? And to be honest with you, the overwhelming response from all sides is yes. I do not want to harm my child, and I did not know I was doing it. So that perspective is really transforming the work and the conversations that we're having in Contra Costa County. We're using this in all aspects of our work, and I'll explain the work here in just a minute. But the other point that I want to make here is that we need to understand that young people feel that by rejecting their identity, that you're rejecting all of who we are. And it is that sense, that deep sense of shame and rejection, that is the issue here. So, as a community, as a group of leaders trying to say, what can we do? How do we approach this? What the research told us is that, obviously, LGBTQ youth often experience more rejecting behaviors than other youth. An increasing number of rejecting behaviors from families correlates to an increase in poor health outcomes, and particularly mental health outcomes. And community and social norms and rules have a significant impact on the behavior. And so there was one of the administrators in Contra Costa County Mental Health when the Mental Health Services Act of 2004 began to provide innovations funding that was geared toward underserved populations and particularly focusing on ethnic minorities and LGBT individuals and their families. They began to take a look at what was going on in Contra Costa County, and there was only one LGBTQ specific community center for the entire county, which is one of the largest geographic counties in the state of California and enormously diverse. There were very few support groups for LGBTQ youth that existed. You know, a few came and went, you know, a few months at a time, but there was no system whatsoever and very few services. And mental health and nonprofit service providers were not prepared to really be able to address the issues. They were not even creating environments where youth were self-identifying. And so there was no way to really be building a system of care. So these are the four key things that, as a county, we have been doing for the last nearly 2 years now. I've been working as the facilitator for the collaborative for the last little over a year. To engage key support networks for LGBTQ youth and their families, and to really begin the education around the Family Acceptance Project, Rejecting Behaviors, and gaining a greater community-wide understanding around that. Increasing access to and participation in LGBTQ culturally competent mental health services. We have a lot of work to do there because most of the services that are being offered in the county are not culturally competent. And yet in the last year, we've had a dramatic increase in the number of primary care providers and mental health providers who are going through training, and the entire county mental health system, as a part of this project, has changed many of their forms, their intake processes and procedures to begin asking questions and gathering information in a much more sensitive and competent manner. And that's been a huge part of the work that we've been doing together. And then ultimately, the intent is to prove health outcomes. So this has been we have $1.5 million over 3 years to learn something. I mean, that's a rare opportunity. It's a really, really rare opportunity. So our main learning goal is that we believe that the theory is that if we can strengthen community social supports around LGBTQ youth, including working to help strengthen what's going on at home and reduce rejecting behaviors, that we can build a community system of care, an interlocking system, and mental health services that will, in fact, over time, improve mental health outcomes. And so that's the core work that we've been doing. So our perspective, and I think that this is really important, and I think it makes a lot of sense and should easily make sense to you, that when you work with students, you know that they are coming to you from a family context and a community context, and that they are, at least in part, products of their environment, and that they're bringing all of those experience and all of those issues with them into the classroom, into the school building. And so we have also based our work on the social ecological model, and that we're really focused on the youth and the family as a unit. And that in building a system of care, what we have to do is to try to find a way as a community to provide safe places for families with LGBTQ children to self-identify and show up so that they can receive some assistance in working through their issues as a family. So the core theory behind our work in building a system of care has been that our experience is now telling us that there are 4 primary places where families with LGBTQ children are showing up in the system. Because our first theory was, well, okay, well, if we just take the organizations who are already doing work with queer youth and we strengthen them to work with families, that's how we will have this big impact. Well, guess what? Families don't want to go to queer youth centers if they aren't completely already on the accepting end, and then they don't need to go to a center.